we would like to respectfully acknowledge our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, the Sueño, and Serrano peoples. Today, this place is home to many indigenous peoples from all over the world. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. Welcome. My name is Kim Wilcox. I'm the 9th Chancellor, University of California, Riverside, and I'm delighted by this afternoon's program. 3 former chancellors are joining me. George H.W. Bush used to refer to his son, George W. Bush, as 43, because of course, 43 was the number of the presidency. George W. was the 43rd president of the United States. So I'm really tempted today to introduce 6, 7, and 8, but instead I'll introduce them by name in numerical order. First, Ray Orbach. Ray, as many of you know, was the 6th chancellor of the university, serving from 1992 to 2002. After he left UCR, he went on to become the director of the Office of Science at the U.S. Department of Energy and served there from 2002 to 2009. He then became the founding director of the University of Texas at Austin's Energy Institute. An accomplished scientist, theoretical and experimental physicist, still holding a competitive research grant and with grad students and postdocs. It's an honor to welcome back Chancellor Orbach. Second, Franz Córdova. Franz served as the 7th Chancellor of UC Riverside, serving from 2002 to 2007. Before coming here, Franz was a deputy group leader at Los Alamos National Laboratory and a NASA chief scientist. And after departing Riverside, she went on to become the president of Purdue University and then director of the National Science Foundation. Welcome, Franz. And third, Tim White. Tim was the 8th chancellor at UCR, serving from 2008 to 2012. Before coming here, he held academic and administrative positions at University of Michigan, Oregon State, University of Idaho, UC Berkeley. And after leaving here, I think we all appreciate, he went on to become the chancellor of the Cal State University system and just retired a few weeks ago. At Cal State, he was instrumental in helping transform the university system, particularly in terms of student success. And Tim is one of those Californians who has touched every part of our system: Diablo Valley Community College, Fresno State, Cal State East Bay, and UC Berkeley. So community colleges, Cal States, and UCs. Welcome all. So great to have you here. Oh, let's get right to it. Oh, yep. Let's get right to it. We talked a little bit beforehand about format. Well, I'll ask some questions, but I really do look forward to the conversation, and it's great to have all of you back. I was just thinking, last time Ray was on campus, I think I remember walking around and meeting some students who I got to say, this is Ray Orbach of Orbach Science Library fame, and they had to have his picture. And the last time Francis was in town, we met downtown with some friends at the Mission Inn and had just a delightful evening. And Tim has been busy, but he's coming back, I'm sure, soon once the pandemic's gone. All right, let's get to it. Public higher education. Lots of things going on in that world these days. I'm going to start, I think we'll go reverse chronological. So we'll start with number 8. This is Tim. You've been in the throes of trying to think through education, higher education in America, leading the largest public university system in the country. Let's talk a little bit about STEM education, which has gotten a lot of attention. How do we work to improve and strengthen our national position in the world in terms of STEM education?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, it seems to me that we have been at the cutting edge of the innovations and good ideas that have come out of the related fields in STEM. And so that's a point of pride and also a point of achievement, but also a point of challenge, especially when we've had some difficulties with bringing in scholars from around the world with political changes and the like. But I think one of the things that is really an important aspect as we go forward in the area of STEM and high value degrees, if you will, both at the graduate and undergraduate level, is being much more purposeful and focused on the issues of equity and bringing in these brilliant minds who come from every walk of life, who have the intellect to do the work just may not have had the opportunity to express it yet. If we're going to really continue to lead the world in STEM, we're going to have to make sure that we do a much better job at the undergraduate and graduate levels, whether they're the R1 universities or the comprehensive colleges and universities across this great country. But without that, I think we're going to end up losing our position in the world. And related to that, of course, are issues around the digital divide and student well-being and mental health and some of the non-academic components that actually go into the ecosystem that allow students who come from often the margins of society to succeed.
Thanks. Vannevar Bush, of course, gets a lot of credit. I'm looking at the former NSF director for Endless Frontier and what that meant for science in America. One of the key aspects of his vision was inclusion. At that time, it was inclusion of universities across the country, white males, but nonetheless, broader sense of universities. I hear you talking about the same thing beyond just universities, but the people who inhabit those universities in the 21st century.
Absolutely. Inclusive excellence is what it really is.
Thanks. Ray, you spent time wrestling with the federal government on both sides in terms of funding. Talk to us a little bit about how you see funding in STEM education in the 21st century and what the prospects are.
Well, funding, the federal government funds education, but a very modest amount compared to the amount that the states do. I think when you hear from France, she can give you a better picture because NSF plays a major role in education across the country, especially in the STEM fields. But yesterday you saw it in a wonderful way for Perseverance and its landing on Mars. That NASA does a terrific job of bringing very young people into the excitement and of discovery and participation in it. And to me, what they did yesterday is just a perfect example of how the federal government can involve students of every level, from pre-kindergarten all the way up through K through 12, not even counting universities, in the pursuit of exciting physical and biological opportunities. The landing on Mars had over 1 million children online, being able to ask questions, talking to people, seeing the marvels. It was really a tremendous event. And I thought that really set a standard for the federal government, namely to reach out. We have such brilliant programs and such leadership in science and math around the world and in engineering. If we can somehow do what NASA does to incorporate, and give children an understanding of how it's hard work, but how exciting it can be. I was very impressed. And of course, NASA has built into its budget something like 2% for education. When I was at DOE, we took money and put it into education, trying to mimic what NASA does so well. But I think the real person who can talk to you about STEM education is France, because NSF has really led the way in that field.
I agree, and you both have kind of set her up because she's a national leader in inclusion in STEM education and across the social spectrum and also the effectiveness. So, France, give us your thoughts about STEM education today and how we keep moving ahead, hopefully staying ahead of our international competitors, and also how we manage to sync that up as best we can with the future needs of the nation in terms of employment and workforce.
Well, first, I want to thank you, Chancellor Kim, and congratulate you on your leadership of UCR. And thank you for putting together this wonderful event and giving us all a chance to reunite and to talk about important issues. I want to say hello to all the viewers out there. I've loved my visits back to the campus, and I'm hoping to return just as soon as we're past this pandemic. So you ask a few things, and yes, Ray, thank you for introducing me via the National Science Foundation, which does have a huge commitment to STEM education. It was interesting in this last administration, just a couple of years ago, in fact, in December of 2018, I participated in the rollout of the White House STEM Education Strategic Plan with a lot of federal agencies, including NASA and NIST and NIH, DOE. And I think this plan really addresses the questions you're asking because it emphasized the need for what Tim was talking about earlier, which is to increase diversity and equity and inclusion for women and racial minorities in STEM. That was a major point of the strategic plan. It emphasized the need to increase STEM literacy in the entire country and to strengthen America's STEM workforce. And I think maybe in our conversation, we'll come back to that because California plays such a major role in strengthening the STEM workforce at every level. I was able to chair the White House's interagency committee that was charged with implementing those the specific actions, the recommendations that were called for in that plan. But what I think is that it's not just the government's role to do this, although the government does have a major role, but it's the states, it's academia, it's industry, it's foundations, it's all of our role to emphasize those goals that were underlined in the strategic plan. So you also asked about the crisis we face and what we're learning from COVID and all. We're living in an increasingly sophisticated world, and it's really important that we increase the technological skills of all the students going through our system. Innovation through science and technology is just key to addressing the global crises that we face. And that's never been more underscored than by the COVID pandemic itself. So encouraging innovation at every level of schooling, I think is really critical. And I want to say hats off to the teachers who encourage science fairs and invention conventions for students and all those kinds of things. COVID-19 reminds us that it's not good enough to simply respond to crises when they happen, but it's much better to be prepared for them ahead of time. And I think what we'll see, that's one of the things we'll see that's new coming out of this, is that realization that there are all kinds of crises that could come our way. And we experienced global climate change this past week coming in full force at the same time as the pandemic and all. And I think there'll be more of an emphasis on preparing ourselves and getting the students involved in thinking about the future and about tomorrow. And again, the government has a big role in that, but so do universities, so do community colleges and our high schools and all. This is just a big goal for all of us to get on board with.
Could I add something to that?
Sure.
I'd like to follow on to what Fran said. I think all of us, all three of us, feel so proud about Riverside. Your campus, Kim, is just an example of what Tim and
your campus, Ray.
our campus. It is a leader in diversity, in openness, in equity. What I love is how it's maintained that leadership over the years. We started very much earlier and we had some success, but to see how the campus has continued to be a world leader really in quality education across the board for men and women, for underrepresented minorities, for everyone in our community. And of course, the relationship to the community is so special at UC Riverside. I just want to compliment you, Kim, and I guess all of us in a way, for staying with it over these years and developing it to such a point.
Well, thanks, Ray. I can tell you, I get questions all the time about how did this happen? And I always start the conversation with Ray Orbach and how you set about to look at the demographics of the campus in a very different way and a very different light with a future look. And then I talk about Tim and France and all the components that have added to it. And people ask me, what is our secret sauce at Riverside? There's a historical piece that leads to the reality. And I say culture. You have to have a culture that embraces this. And that's really what all of you did during your time at Riverside. That attracts people. We actually have people who come to Riverside now because it's a great research university and great resources, but also because of this visible set of values. And then programs. We do programs that support our students and our faculty. Interestingly, most universities start the other way. They start with programs, thinking that that will fix the problem. And then they try to recruit some people to the programs, and then and you can't get very far. You, as three visionaries, created a culture that has served the test of time, and now the implementation becomes so much easier. So I want to say publicly thank you to all of you as well.
Kim, I think that culture issue is exactly, it eats anything else any day of the week. And, one of the concerns about that, it's going to be a relatively short-term concern, but a very significant one, so we don't lose a generation here, is with the interruption of education and the educational deficits that are occurring across, preschool through the through high school and community colleges. At the universities, we'll be facing students who may not be as prepared or as capable as they might have been before the pandemic for the next 3 or 4 years. And even though it's not our fault that they're coming to us that way, it's going to be our university's responsibility to make sure that we give them the support they need and any sort of bridging, because we know the basic DNA and ability is there. But if we don't have some flexibility in handling this next wave of students over the next 3 or 4 years, I'm afraid this diverse pipeline in the STEM fields and other fields is going to be challenged unfairly.
I couldn't agree more. When I look at the arc of history, it was easy to support students when they're primarily upper middle class white people, males. It became more difficult as we kind of broadened our enrollment by background. And we have an ever increasing responsibility to assist those students. And you're right, this is a particularly challenging piece. France, you spent a lot of time thinking about these issues at NSF. I know your work in setting priorities with the foundation certainly subsumed this. Any kind of inside the Beltway perspective that would be helpful?
Well, two things come to mind. One is that the National Science Board, which is the governing arm of the National Science Foundation, really put their gray matter to this challenge a couple of years ago. And they wrote a wonderful report about how to develop the STEM workforce overall, because there's just this tremendous need. In fact, the National Academies had said that they predicted a shortfall of over 3 million skilled technical workers by the year 2022. So how do we address this? And they went on listening tours all over the country. And I believe UC Riverside was one of the places where they visited, and they got a lot of insight. They came back.
I have to say, we went to the Culver Center downtown, had a great meeting.
Yes. So I remember well the development of the Culver Center. And they kept coming back to UC Riverside, as did the Council on Competitiveness, which is also studying this issue. And they visited UCR. Everybody comes away from it thinking exactly what Ray was saying, that this is an extraordinary place where something special is happening. And I think we can all be very proud, the entire community and the UC system can be proud that US News and World Reports and those kind of rankings, which we always railed against. Why aren't they evaluating the really important stuff, And we critiqued individual things that they did rank, because we said, no, those are biased and all. But they finally got on board, and UCR's rankings just went way up, which my daughter, who's a UCR graduate, was very, very happy with. So she just talked about that this week. Yeah, there is just an urgent need to rethink about the STEM workforce. And by STEM, I don't mean to exclude, anybody, because we're just growing to be a very technologically dependent society, whether we, want to acknowledge and embrace that or not. We've all got things called cell phones and TVs and big screens and monitors, and we enjoy all forms of communication and entertainment with those. So it's really important that we develop the critical skills and we give those in every way we can. So the other thing I wanted to point to is an NSF program that started out just so small because people just didn't realize how important it is. What we're talking about is called the Advanced Technological Education Program, ATE. I think you probably know that well in California because there are so many community colleges that are participating in it. And what it does is it gives community colleges that write a proposal and ask for it, the equipment in order to upskill and reskill people from all walks of life, young people as well as older people, people who want to have reskilling. And so it's not just the four-year universities that are, really important in this whole thing of developing an increasingly STEM literate, a capable and technological society, but the community colleges now, and I've been so impressed with my visits to them, have the tools, the laboratory facilities, the teachers, and the skills of the teachers to really help raise those students. I think we just need to put more of a spotlight on it, increase the awareness and the appreciation that the skills that students can develop, even when they're not going to university and getting a full four-year degree, are just very, very important, and put a big emphasis on that. And I know that Tim, you've been very, very involved, and I'd love your perspective on other things that California is doing to bring this about.
Well, I think you're right. The upskilling things. I mean, through some of our extension programs, I know in both the UC system and the Cal States, especially now for the upskilling and reskilling activities. And in some regards, this is getting to that fundamental question that has been asked more in the public sphere over the last few years: is what is the return on investment of a college education versus picking up badges and training and a skill set that can be used. And I think it is important to differentiate between training somebody to be a coder, to do something, a particular task, versus educating somebody to be able to think analytically and look around the corners, and the clairvoyance that really leads to an educated society. But the social mobility that is behind Kim's backdrop there, and certainly many of the CSU campuses are also, for comprehensives, have been, when they did the last ranking of the top 20 universities in the country, 14 of them were CSUs. The social mobility does not happen while they're an undergraduate student or a graduate student at the university. It happens because what they do with that degree when they get out, and that's where the ascent comes, by having a sort of a level of professionalism that their family, their community have not had before. And so this does tie into making sure that while we're educating for education's sake, we're also being mindful of the fact that these men and women need and seek jobs at the end of their education or towards the end of their education. And they need to be jobs that are bringing value to America. You spoke, France, eloquently about the national deficit of degrees in the STEM fields, several million. Well, in California, just bachelor's degrees, we're still looking at about a deficit by 2025 of about 800,000 degrees at our current rate, by which UC, CSU, and the privates are creating bachelors in California. So we're going to have a technologically workforce that requires education and training, and not the workforce to supply that. And that will not bode well for our economy. And it'll create more of a polarization in society, which we know can be very debilitating and will not be helpful.
It's very serious right now. I find that we are becoming bifurcated with those who can compete in this high technology world and those who cannot. And it's really the sense of intellectual development. It doesn't matter what field it is, but we have to educate students to be able to take advantage of new things. the world is changing. It's always changing. In 5 years, you can hardly recognize the jobs that are out there.
Well, Ray, you know, one of the things you mentioned about the culture, and Kim mentioned the word support. You know, as I looked at running the CSUs, the thing that I found to be, I was going to say most significant, but certainly on par with the academic challenges that the faculty give to the students, is to provide that support that they need, academic support and student support, because those who come from the margins don't have an uncle or a brother or a sister that they can ask, say, you know, I stubbed my toe in my chemistry class, what should I do? Well, they can't get that at home if they have a home. And so the way we actually embrace things is invest also in the support systems that help these young women and men succeed.
Now I'm sure first I should comment to the all the viewers. Lots of questions. I wish we could get to all of them, but there's only so much time. But there is one that just caught my eye from Jack Clark. Some of you may remember Jack Clark, a leader in the community, who asked a question that's very relevant here, and that is, let's talk a little bit about the liberal arts and what opportunities do we see for liberal arts graduates in the 21st century, and how does this fit with the world of technology and the fast evolution? And I'm going to let anybody jump in first. Oh, Franz has her hand up. Okay, this is Jeopardy. You're in.
I get to start because I was the liberal arts graduate here. so I got
yes, remind the audience.
I got a Bachelor of Arts in English
and a PhD
in physics.
Yeah. Yep.
So and I was accepted to graduate school in anthropology, so I got social sciences there too. But I thought I needed a break after school. It was, you know, I was in the Vietnam War era, and so I instead did an education project back east with a bunch of Caltech graduates. So yeah, I think that the liberal arts experiences in backgrounds is just essential to being a thinking, contributing individual in this very complex society. It really helps you appreciate things like culture, why culture matters, why the social sciences matter. And then so that, I mean, if you just create tools, you have to then ask yourself, what is this tool good for? And can it do good? Can it potentially do harm? That's a very important question. In fact, there are some universities that hold whole centers where they take all their science and technology majors and they put them through that kind of experiences, asking critical questions about the beneficial uses of developments in science and technology. And as we all know, there's such an underappreciation of some aspects of discoveries today. I mean, just look at vaccines and all the different information and misinformation that's going on about that. But you take anything, GMO foods, nuclear power, just there's so many different examples, gene editing. And so with a liberal arts background, you really learn to have a critical mind and to ask questions and to also look at the literature and maybe read it and try to understand it and ask questions about it and talk with others and, you know, assess and analyze. And so for me, it's been incredibly important. And every time in my various work places, people have asked me, well, was it just good for correcting our memos? Because I am famous for correcting people's memos, the grammar. I say, no, there's much more. Let me tell you about it. But I'll let the others give their perspective.
I'd like to speak in defense of the humanities and social sciences. The logic issues there are just as tough as they are in the physical and biological sciences. There's much to learn about development and understanding, and as Franz said, analysis and so on. And I find in philosophy and in English, I find in history, the questions that are being asked are subtle, complex, and working your way through them as a student is the same thing as working your way through the complexity of a physical or life science issue. I don't like to separate the humanities and social sciences from the physical sciences. I think they're a whole. And it's very important that people taste and get a feeling for all the fields that human endeavor has developed over the centuries and over the millennia. So for me, there's no gap. A deep education in English, as Franz just indicated, or in the humanities or social sciences, gives a student the tools to be able to think originally and deal with new situations. When it comes to technology, it can be learned. The ideas behind complexity, for example, large data sets and so on, are the same in the sciences as they are in the humanities. So there's a commonality there that we really should try and emulate in our educational structure.
I mean, I would just echo my friend's comments and add one small piece. I remember when I was just became provost at Oregon State. I was last century. We had a person who was out of Intel who was going to the mat in a very public meeting about getting rid of all the humanities and social sciences and making Oregon State, focus much more so on engineering. And I'd been on the job for about a week, and I was sitting in the back, and I stood up and I challenged this fellow who I won't name because you'll recognize who it is. And I said, I want to make sure that our students who are civil engineers, that when they go out to build a bridge across native lands, know something about Native American history, our original peoples. And likewise, I want people that are going into medicine to know the great books, right? So when they're facing some of those ethical questions that you face in medicine or whatever professional field you think about or job you think about, is to the point that Franz and Ray just made is this humanities and social sciences create the emergence of the human soul. And on that basis, then we can be productive, thoughtful, integral members of an advanced society.
And to go back where Franz was earlier on COVID, this COVID pandemic has really shown a light on that. We're now in the midst of a social question about what is a public good truly, what is a common good, why do you wear a mask for yourself, for the broader public? These aren't questions that biologists can answer. These are questions we need deeper thinkers. No offense to the biologists in the crowd.
Yeah, I was going to say, wait a minute.
And let us remember who stirred the minds and hearts of everyone at the inauguration a couple of weeks ago. Was that a young poet? Also, you have behind you, Kim, that great #1 in social mobility, but you could just have easily have listed your amazing creative writing department, which I'm just so proud of. They are so original and diverse and have contributed so much. And I know you're about to have, if you haven't already had, you're bringing all the a lot of poets laureates together and all, and having, but that is so UCR. I mean, it's just it's creative, it's individual, it's diverse, and that it really shines in your creative writing department.
And in fact, one of our creative writing faculty members hosted LeVar Burton in a panel like this last night as part of this celebration process. If I could, I want to bring it home a little bit more. You all have your knowledge of California. Talk to us about how well we're positioned in California for the 21st century. If you had advice for the state on the educational side, research side, aspirational side, how do you see us, particularly Ray and Franz from afar and Tim right in the center of the cyclone? And I'll let anybody start.
Well, I think you have a great leader in Michael Drake, who's been a friend of mine, and I know of some of you for a long time. And I mentioned Michael not just because he's the new University of California president, but because when it came to the medical school, and I think might touch on that later, people don't realize it, but Michael had a really important influence on the medical school getting started at UC Riverside. He was my major consultant when I knew we had to go to the regents and convince them that they needed a 6th medical school in the UC system, go to the other UC deans of medical schools. And, and I expected maybe they could be tight with their donors and all, and were they going to be on board? And what kind of a medical school would it be? Could we realize in it the diversity that has been such a integral part of UC Riverside? And Michael, who started out as a vice chancellor at UC San Francisco, was just and in charge of their graduate program and bringing in new folks, recruiting them to the medical school, was just so helpful in pointing to the right literature about how to do this, and giving me advice and introducing me to the American Medical Association and their leadership there. And just being, I mean, that's what people talk a lot about, mentorship, and we all have our ideas of what being a good mentor is, but you need mentorship at every stage of your life and for every one of your goals. And so anyway, I just think you have an inspirational, helpful, immensely helpful leader in Mike Dre.
He will be wonderful. He is wonderful. And it's been wonderful, France, that you were able to get the medical school off the ground. I can tell you, we tried awful hard during my tenure to get people's attention, and you did it, and I'm very proud of what you accomplished. In terms of California, it has a leg up on every other state in the union. I live in Austin, and we keep talking about ourselves as the new Silicon Valley. Well, that may or may not be the case, but let's face it, communication, technology, and so on is really the future of this country, and it's centered in California. And as all of us have commented, now the trick is to share that amongst its entire population. It's important that such a diverse state as California gives its population the opportunities to participate in this new world. And it is a new world. It's changing all the time, but the leadership is in California. And we hear often about Texas stealing people from California. We're not taking anybody. People are voting with their feet. And it's terribly important that California maintains its leadership in these areas for not only its own sake, but as an example for the rest of the country. If it, with its very diverse population, can maintain excitement across the spectrum and involve everyone in the fruits of development and opportunity, it will set a standard for the rest of the country, if not world. So to me anyway, California has an opportunity that doesn't exist anywhere else. And it needs to take advantage of that. And I hope it will.
Tim, no longer people complaining about the job you're doing because you're retired, so you can say whatever you want.
Well, you kind of go back to the educational infrastructure in California, and it's a genius. And there's a lot of people who say that the master plan is time has come and gone, and I disagree with that. I think the fact that California, the public sector, has the ability to go to community college, which accepts the top 100% of the high school graduates, or to a Cal State, which accepts the top third, or UC, which accepts the top 12%. Again, rough numbers here. And then you can migrate around the systems, as I did as a kid last century. That is genius. We can quibble about whether it's funded well or not. And there's just been a recommendation that came out on Tuesday about sort of a master application for both UC and CSUs. I mean, there's things that can make it more accessible to more people to raise their hand and say, I'd like to go to a university. But the basic idea of having those three things, I think, has led to the point that Ray and Francis said about California leading innovation. the one
Could I-
paradox,
I'd like to-
I would say is that the digital divide in California, again, the pandemic is just shone a bright light on it, is horrifying. So here's a state that's at the bleeding edge of technology, and yet we have a digital divide that is excluding people in rural areas and in many low-income areas of big cities to be able to actually learn because they can't access technology. That has to be attended to. Sort of broadband for all needs to be sort of a California initiative here sooner rather than later.
Here,
I'd like to follow up on Tim's comment about the master plan. The master plan is what will enable California to achieve its goals. I'm in another state and I'm familiar with states across the country, and they do not have master plans. There is a flagship campus, and then there are the others that are below it. One of the wonderful things about being a chancellor at Riverside is that we have a single, that you have a single academic senate across the entire system. And that means that no campus is subservient to anybody else. You're all equal and you have the same command on resources that everybody else does. And as Tim outlined, the fact that there's mobility across the system from junior college to state universities to the University of California is something unique. It's very precious. And I hope that California continues to keep its master plan. I too hear about, well, it's over and we don't need it anymore. It's nonsense. It's really the strength, in my view, of the state itself.
Great answers. Okay, we're not going to have forever, and I want to make sure there's plenty of time for the last question. And this is one I'm going to pose to each of you. We spent a lot of time talking about the current situation in the world and the future and opportunities and the rest. I want to kind of walk back in time, if we could, and I'm going to ask you to reflect and share with all of us what you see as your proudest moment, your biggest accomplishment, your biggest contribution to the life of the University of California, Riverside. And I think we'll go in chronological order. So that means you're first, Ray.
When I came to Riverside, we had 7,000 students, and we were regarded as the runt of the system. And so my proudest aspect is to see our campus develop in the way that it has. It's developed with excellence and it's developed with equity. We represent the entire spectrum of opportunity for students of any social or economic background. And the diversity, the fact that students come to Riverside because of its diversity, to me is my proudest moment. That, however, has to be coupled with excellence. And so if you talk about proudest moments, I would say that the fact that this wonderful diversity comes to Riverside because of its excellence is my proudest moment.
I couldn't say it better. Thank you. Okay, we're up to France.
So we already mentioned the medical school, and I just think so. I'll say, and that was definitely the proudest thing for me. Because it was just starting from ground zero. And I know that many people who came after me, starting with Robert Gray and then the chancellors and Tim and others, and then you just really built on that. But I don't think anybody knows how those early moments, just how fragile building something out of nothing was. And the community just rallied in an extraordinary way. Even the community members that gave us a little bit of a hard time asked us some pretty challenging questions at those open forums and such. But just amazing support from the community leaders. And I already mentioned the support we had from the system and Michael Drake and the other deans of the medical schools. I mean, here's Jerry Levy at UCLA, the dean of their medical school. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're just, 60 miles, 70 And then it's something from UCLA. Are they going to go for this? And they were immensely helpful. And the hospitals in San Bernardino, Loma Linda University that could have felt threatened, but just little by little, just building up the case for it was so important. And I think the foundation that Ray had left with all the diversity, that was the key ingredient. That not okay. So let me just rewind for a sec. We wanted to be an AAU-like university. That was when I came in. Everybody said that's it. That's the goal. But we asked ourselves, what is it that the university really needs to do? And we said, clearly in this huge 4 million person inland empire, what we really need is a medical school, and it needs to include a diversity of students who don't get a chance to be medical students, and a country that really needs them and their skills. And so instead of driving for the wrong thing, I think everybody got on board and driving for the right thing, for what it was that would really take the university to the next level. But I can't conclude my remarks without mentioning the academic senate, because, in the UC system, there is such fear of the academic senate. And I loved the Senate. I thought that they were critical to the support for the medical school and so many other things we had to do. You mentioned the Culver Center earlier, and building a big arts presence downtown. But the Senate was amazingly helpful through the whole way. And I guess one of my sort of humble, proudest moments was when I left UCR. There was a little party out on the quad. I think it was the engineering quad. And the head of the academic senate recited, I think, Queen Elizabeth's farewell speech or something like that. And he was a liberal arts major. And they gave me a plaque, one of those plexiglass plaques with a big plexiglass star on the top. And it thanked me for my partnership with the academic senate. And I thought, yes.
That's a real tribute.
So,
Tim?
Well, I think the gathering for chancellors really underscores, the continuity of leadership, because, I feel proud of the medical school as well, on the shoulders of Ray and France. During my time is when we got it accredited and hired the inaugural dean in Big Holes, and got the initial funding, not out of UCOP, but out of the Riverside County Commissioners, and recruited the first class. And look where it's going now. So the idea that really important things, many of us get a chance to touch along the way, I think is really a great testimony to consistency of leadership. The Living the Promise campaign that you just closed out, Kim, congratulations on that. I'm proud of the fact that was sort of the theme that I established when I first got there, about fulfilling the promise of individual creativity and becoming a full member of society, ties in with the equity and inclusion aspect. And so that I'm proud of that. And I guess maybe the final thing I'm proud of is, I got the chance to host the Regents meeting during the Occupy era, and we had over 300 law enforcement officers on campus, and we didn't have enough police officers to manage the moment with really serious. But I survived, so I'm proud of that as well.
Well, I laugh because I wish I had $1 for every time someone has told me about that Regents meeting in Riverside. And it's usually with, I don't think we're ever going to go there again. It really left a mark in people's minds. But I want to leave where Tim is on this notion of continuity. France fought the battles to get the medical school started. You actually stood it up, Tim. I was here to be the chancellor at the first medical school graduation, an arc of history. We've talked a lot about the inclusion piece, and yes, we're closing the campaign that you began, Tim. It really is great to see how these pieces fit together, and the fact that I look up to and respect all of you and what you've done, and France, Tim didn't mention this, but in the strategic plan that he assembled in 2010, one of the stated goals was to achieve the profile of an AAU university, building on that aspiration from before. And again, now we have achieved that aspiration. We haven't gotten voted in yet. That's a secret, you know, and turn out the lights and then turn it back on kind of thing. But we've achieved those things. So these are aspirations that have evolved from the culture that Ray and others created so many decades ago that are coming to fruition. And we talk a lot about the things we're doing today being important. Now, I'll make one last comment particularly for my three colleagues here. As you know, the university was founded in 1954, which means our centennial is 2054. And we're talking about crafting a vision for our university that would be appropriate for the 21st century university in the middle of our century. So I'm officially right now inviting you all back to a similar panel in 2054.
I'll be there.
All right. Oh, you're muted, Tim. You're muted.
I'll need a walker, but I'll be there.
We'll get you a seat down front. With that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for what you have done for this university. Your fingerprints are everywhere when I walk around the campus and talk to people and see what we have. And just thank you for being such good friends and such great panel members here today. Thanks so much.